Okay, so we're picking up in Matthew chapter 28, and we're in verse 5. We know that the angel has moved the stone, and the Bible says that the angel sat upon the stone, and his face was shining like lightning, his clothes were white as snow, and the guards all fell out, fainted dead away. And now the women are arriving at the tomb, and the angel spoke to the women. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come see where his body was lying, and now go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you." So here is where it appears that in the Gospel of Matthew that there's a period of time, a short period of time, between verse 4 and verse 5, because the other Gospel writers tell us that the women on their way to the tomb were discussing, okay, we've got all these spices, we want to treat the body, now how are we going to move the stone? And that when they got to the tomb, that they saw that the stone had already been moved. So that indicates that between verses 4 and 5 in Matthew that there was a short period of time. And also there in a couple of the Gospels, there's one angel, and one Gospel it says that there were two inside the tomb and speaking to the women. So again, these are minor details that could vary depending on who was telling the story. And remember, oh my goodness, they're just, first of all, they're frightened, they're amazed, they don't know what to think, and so these are, again, just minor details. The crux of the matter is that the stone is moved. In every gospel, the stone is moved. An angel or angels are there, and they speak to the women. And what they say is the same in every gospel. First, they said, "Don't be afraid." We're living in a time of massive uncertainty. Uncertainty about our health issues, uncertainty about the virus, uncertainty about our economy, uncertainty about many, many things. When we'll be able to get out? When will life return to normal? Will life ever be normal again, or will it be a new normal? So much uncertainty, and what God says to us is the same thing He said to those women: "Don't be afraid." He said, "I know you're looking for Jesus, but he's not here." And that was obvious, wasn't it? The Bible tells us that this tomb was a new tomb. Okay, what that means is it had never been used before. So there was no other bodies in there. There was only one body there, and it was no longer there. He says, "You are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen." And again, in other Gospels, it goes into detail. They said, "Remember, Jesus told you when he was alive that he was going to be turned over to the church leaders, and that they were going to mistreat him, and they were going to beat him, and they were going to crucify him, and he was going to die, but on the third day he would rise again." And so they're reminding him of Jesus's words, of what Jesus said, the promise that he made before he ever died, that he would die, but that he would rise on the third day. And so they said, "Now come and see where his body was lying." So look for yourself. The body's not there. "And now go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you." So basically, the angel said, "Don't be afraid. Remember what Jesus told you. Come and see. Go and tell." And that is what the women did. In the meantime, Matthew gives us some details that the other writers don't. Starting in verse 11, it says, "As the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and told the leading priest what had happened." Okay, some is plural, so some plural guards went into the city, so some plural guards didn't go into the city to report. And so we don't know how many guards there were, but at least 4 guards um, in this Roman brigade. Um, a meeting with the elders was called, and they decided to give the soldiers a large bribe. They told the soldiers, "You must say, 'Jesus' disciples came during the night while we were sleeping, and they stole his body. If the governor hears about it, we'll stand up for you so you won't get into trouble.'" So the guards accepted the bribe and said what they were told to say. Their story spread widely among the Jews, and they still tell it today. So here's the story they came up with, that in this tomb, which was again a new tomb, so no other bodies in it, the tomb was hewn out of solid rock, the Bible tells us, and covered with this large stone. Um, and also, it had been sealed. Now, the Roman guard was assigned on the morning of the Sabbath because the church leaders remembered Jesus saying that he was going to rise on the third day. And they said, okay, we need to, the disciples might try to steal the body and make it look like he's risen, and then we would be in trouble. And so the guard was stationed early in the morning on the Sabbath day. And in order to secure the tomb, they would have to verify the contents, and then the stone had to be put back in place. The Roman seal, there was a rope, and some of the historians say that there was clay on either side, that it was sealed with clay, and that inside this clay was the stamp of the Roman emperor. So it meant that the seal guaranteed the contents of the tomb. So notice that the Pharisees didn't say, "Oh, well, say that the body was stolen before you went on guard," because again, the seal would mean that they had to, in order to seal the tomb, they first would have to guarantee the contents of the tomb. But they came up with this other story, which is just as incredulous, that in the middle of the night, that the disciples came, the disciples who, remember, who weren't even at the foot of the cross because they were so frightened, and they managed to break this seal, roll this massive stone away, take the body of Jesus, and not one single guard heard anything or saw anything. So it's an, it's an amazing story. But the guards took the bribe and they told the story, and it's even being told today that this is what happened, that the disciples just stole the body of Jesus, which is a pretty incredulous story. So let's go back to our story, and this time let's pick up in Luke 24. So turn with me to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, and let's look at verses 11 and 12. I'm sorry. Let's turn back to verse 9. Let's start in verse 9. So they, and this is the women, rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and several other women who told the apostles what had happened. Now, let's not assume that all of the apostles were in one place at one time. Maybe they're like us. Maybe they were each in their own individual homes when they heard the news. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men, so they didn't believe it. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. Stooping, he peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. And then John's gospel gives us even more detail. So let's look at John 20, verses 1 through 10. So we're in John chapter 20, verse 1. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the other disciple being John. Remember, this is John's gospel, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They've taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." Peter and the other disciples started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. So this is John. John goes to the door of the tomb and looks in, but doesn't go in yet. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside, just like Simon. Rush right in. So impetuous. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first, that's John, also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then, they had not understood the scriptures that said, Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. So, Mary Magdalene was the one who reported to Peter and to John the news. And we see here that Peter and John run to the tomb. We also see that John is faster than Peter. John gets there first. But John doesn't go into the tomb. He stops at the door and he looks in. But Peter doesn't hesitate. Peter runs straight in, as Peter would. And then John also enters the tomb. And what they see, don't miss this, they see the grave clothes. And they see, now some people have even said the grave clothes as if the body used to be there, it's still wrapped up and the body's gone, or that they were neatly folded. We're not sure. We do know that the body part of the grave clothes was separate from the head part. So it kind of sounds like that it was the way that it was when Jesus' body was still wrapped, but that the body's not there. But what we do know is that the grave clothes are there. Now stop and think about that for a moment. If the disciples, which they couldn't get into the tomb other than through rolling the stone, and they couldn't do that without breaking the seal, and they couldn't do that without waking the guards. But if they had done that, do you think they would have stopped and unwrapped the body and then taken the time to wrap the grave clothes back around as if the body had been there, and leave the grave clothes all neatly? Of course not. Of course they wouldn't. And so when John and Peter saw the grave clothes there, but no body, they saw and they believed.